Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I'm your host. Today in the studio, we have somebody who I have known for a very, very long time. Scott McCrum.
How you doing, Judge?
Doing all right. Believe it or not, this is our 1-year anniversary episode of Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron.
How about that?
Isn't that amazing?
Clap? Will it disturb the mic?
No, please do. Somebody's got to clap.
Judge.
Oh, thank you. And really, honestly, we owe everything to Alana. Alana's here in the studio with us, and everything that she does makes Beyond the Gavel possible. So this is an exciting episode for me. Let me let the listeners know a little bit about you. You were born and raised on the south side of San Antonio, went to South San Antonio High School, graduated in 1978. Day after you graduated, you started in management at Wendy's restaurant. I heard a really good joke yesterday related to Wendy's, and see if you ever talked about this. You know why our burgers are so good?
Why is that?
Because we don't cut corners.
No, I never heard that. You know what's funny? I think you mentioned Scott Simpson did a prior podcast with you, and he was a manager at Wendy's.
That's exactly right. That's actually where I heard the joke from.
It's good training.
I'm telling you. Well, obviously, Wendy's turns out some good people.
Thank you.
After high school, you spent the next 11 years running various restaurants in management and supervisory positions. Returned to school in 1989 to UTSA, graduated with a history degree in 1992. That's something you and I have in common. You went to Texas Tech Law School, graduated in 1995, licensed in 96 to work full-time for Allen Brown's law office, practicing criminal defense. Started your own law practice in 1999, practiced criminal defense, family law, and personal injury. In 2002, you transitioned to 100% criminal defense, licensed to practice in federal court since 2002. And since that time, have focused your practice solely on state and federal criminal defense. That's impressive.
That's it. Well, it's alive, Judge.
We are here to talk about federal court versus state court as it relates specifically to criminal defense in the last week. Last week, I was at a political deal. It was a paralegal deal where folks are working hard in everything that they contribute to the practice of law.
Sure.
I got a phone call from a media outlet, and they wanted to know about a melee that had occurred in the 144th District Court that same day. And then so I looked into it. I ended up seeing a video, which they played that video on a newscast where I was subsequently interviewed. And there was one person in that video which jumped into the melee, grabbed somebody, tried to pull people apart, try to bring calm and order. And so I kept looking at that video, and I was looking at it with the staff here in the 379th. And finally somebody said, "Is that Scott McCrum that is in the middle of that melee pulling people apart?"
Right.
And it turned out to be you.
Well, Judge, you're outing me now. I haven't been contacted by any media people or anything, and I kind of preferred it that way because I had no business jumping into that thing. If your listeners could see me, I'm 63 years old and not in the best physical shape, so that was kind of crazy. But yeah, that was me.
What happened?
Well, we were just like any other docket call. There's somebody in the jury box, a murder defendant, and the deceased family were occupying the first couple rows in the gallery. I was on the other side of the box going over plea paperwork with my client. Didn't have anything to do with that stuff. And all of a sudden I hear pap, 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 and family members just one at a time jumping over the bar, running towards a box. Probably about 4 or 5 of them, just one after another. Obviously, it threw everyone back. There was probably about 30 people in the courtroom. only 2 bailiffs, which is standard.
Right.
But one of them, a female, I'm sure she could take care of herself better than I, but still, they were obviously outnumbered. They went right after that defendant, started pounding him with some heavy shots, which that's in the video so people could see. But yeah, I saw the bailiffs were outnumbered, so I just jumped in, thought I'd try to do what I could do.
It was all instinctual, right?
Oh yeah.
Wasn't something that you really
Well,
thought about.
You introduced me South Side, Judge.
Yeah.
That's that's an instinct that comes with the territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it was smart. My elbow's still pretty sore over it, though.
I'm telling you. The 144th is a felony court in Bexar County. And so my understanding was that it was an issue related to a murder case.
That's right.
And so the folks that jumped over the bar and attacked the defendant, who was handcuffed in the jury box. So the jury box generally serves 2 purposes. One is for the jury. The other is to keep inmates during regular dockets. And that's where you were at. You were at the jury box talking to your client.
It's a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the first time, as you know, that stuff happens now and then. And thinking back, there's been 3 of these things that I've jumped into when the bailiffs usually, well, when they were outnumbered. When it's happening and they have it under control, obviously I don't want any part of that stuff. But another part of that story that's kind of funny, my son is in law school. He's in his 2nd year, but he was here in the courthouse at that time because one of his instructors is a judge that helps the trial team. And so 10 minutes after it was over, he had already seen the video.
Wow.
And he's calling me, and I hadn't talked to him, and I answered, and he's like, "Dad, what the H are you doing?" After seeing what happened.
Well, you have a very good-looking son.
Thank you.
And I'm saying that not only because he really is, but because when I walked in, he showed me a picture of him and compared him to a picture of mine.
He looks an awfully like you, yeah.
He's blessed. He's blessed to have you as a dad.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, so let's talk about the topic at hand. You are a criminal defense attorney in both state and federal courts. Let's say somebody comes into your office or charged with a federal crime. They've never had to go through the federal process before, but they've been through the state court system. And most of the time on this podcast, we discuss state court issues because that's the kind of judge that I operate in. And so what would you do to explain the overall general differences between a federal court criminal case and a state court criminal case?
Boy, there's a lot of differences, and a lot of them are dependent on the type of crime or offense they're charged with. But for the most part, federal crimes, they're higher level crimes. What I mean by that is they're felonies, and they're usually far reaching. They might a fraud type case, a lot of white collar fraud, healthcare fraud, bank fraud. There's a catch-all wire fraud, and those cases typically are filed after a long and thorough investigation by whatever agency is pursuing it. You have FBI, DEA, IRS, you have ATF, depending on the type of offense. So really just to get an idea of was that they're being charged with and what type of offense it is. In state cases, you know, Judge, most cases that we come across on the state level are cases that are filed right after they have the lower level drug cases, assault type cases, robberies, things like that, that an offense occurs and the victim or witness call the police, call a patrolman. They come out, take a report, and if they can, make an arrest. And so it's a case that's kind of built right away when the offense is happening, as opposed to the federal offenses where typically are a result of long investigations.
Right.
A lot of times they'll involve a confidential informant that's working with the agency that'll try to infiltrate and get in and gather evidence, maybe have recordings that they can get from the relevant acts. You'll have a lot of times there's a lot of surveillance data, photos, recordings, things like that, depending on the type of offense it is. On the federal side, there are a lot longer investigations and a lot more work intensive in defending them.
On the federal system, they generally just have more money when it comes to prosecutions, right?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I've never dealt with their budgets, but they sure devote a lot more resources per case than on the state level. You typically have several agents working on one case. Like I said, it'll be over a prolonged period of time. I've just took on a case that is a fraud type case where some of the acts were being conducted in Puerto Rico. And so the agents actually flew to Puerto Rico, met with some people undercover, recording them. So we have all that evidence. And obviously, to answer your question, a lot of resources by the government go into that investigation, a lot more than you would see on the state side.
Which makes sense. One of the things we talk about in my UTSA classes is that the state criminal courts handle about 95 times more of a caseload than the federal. And so you see that reflected in the docket calls. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you don't have them as frequently in federal court, docket calls. And when you do, you have a lot less cases set. I guess there's just, a lot fewer federal offenses going on in terms of just number than you have on the state side.
On the state side, we handle more street type crimes, right? Murder,
Right.
sexual assault of a child, sex assault, ag robs. And so on the federal side, when I practiced as a defense attorney, I did have cases that were assigned to me on the federal side. I was on, back then it was called the A+ panel, which meant that you were able to get appointments from the federal court. And so generally, a lot of those cases were conspiracy type cases.
Yes.
Is that kind of like the bigger type of case that you see on the federal court?
They do file, in fact, probably most cases as conspiracies, and that applies to all of them. You can have it on a fraud case, a conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You can have it in your drug trafficking cases where they're filed as a conspiracy, and that's where the government goes after more than just one individual. Tries to go after a whole organization or a whole group of people that are committing the offense. And the conspiracy statutes laws are it's not real hard for the government to prove up a conspiracy in any case. It just has to be two people who have come to an agreement to commit some unlawful act and then at least one overt act to commit the offense. And so obviously in a drug trafficking case, you could have anywhere from the top of the food chain, the actual big dealer, down to the people who were working for him, and then maybe down to the drivers of the product, or as low as even a lookout that stands at the corner of a residential street where they're conducting those kinds of activities.
So you can have conspiracies in all different types of cases. I'll never forget a case that I had that I was assigned to. And it was, I think your brother, Mike McCrum, was a co-defendant's lawyer. This was a human smuggling case where individuals would cross the border. They would cross, I think in the McAllen sector, walk through the Falfurrias sector, and then come to San Antonio to a safe house. And the Falfurrias sector, from what I understand, is one of the most dangerous sectors during certain times of the year when the temperature is just exceptionally uncomfortable and hot. Yeah. And my client was a young man who was assigned to basically go to an apartment or a home and take care of individuals that had just arrived from south of the border, and he would buy them Whataburgers and buy them some Cokes and basically watch them while other individuals would then show up, pick them up, and take them to wherever they were supposed to go, wherever other destination that they had intended to go to. And so one person apparently walking through the Falfurrias sector died as a result of walking through with the extreme heat, and the individuals that were bringing them along left that person there. And as a result of that death, that was a federal charge that was called transporting immigrants, and somebody dies as a result of that. And so all of them were looking at a federal death penalty case. And the benefit that I had as a lawyer is that I was working with other very, very well-versed in criminal law and federal criminal law attorneys. So we all got to work together and work through this case. But how often do you see cases like that where they come from other areas outside of the United States involved with conspiracies that then you have to represent in court?
Well, obviously in the immigration cases, you have a lot of that. You also have a lot in drug trafficking cases and a lot of the money laundering that goes along with the drug trafficking case, where you'll have specifically activity occurring out of the country. Obviously, the case that's filed is only regarding what they're doing here in the country. You can't charge somebody for laundering money in Mexico. You can't charge them here in the U.S. But yeah, the cases that involve out of the country are usually the drug trafficking, conspiracies, and the immigration cases.
Now, firearms seems to be a big deal in the federal system.
Firearms as well, yes.
What's the situation with that?
Well, ATF investigates those cases and tries to pursue the firearms cases, which also involves conspiracy. You'll have buyers that these organizations, typically the cartels and the organizations in Mexico that needs the firearms and wants the firearms, they'll come up here and they'll have somebody scout and find buyers that'll go to stores and gun shops and academy and what have you. And so they're legal and eligible to buy firearms. And so they'll buy them and then just sell them to whoever brokered the deal.
You have something like SEC violations that occur occur that sometimes get charged?
That's also the white collar stuff. You have SEC cases that are like stocks and insider trading type deals, Ponzi scheme crimes. And those are also filed a lot of times as conspiracies because you have different people within an organizational structure that'll have working within the groups. The conspiracy things like the example that you gave with the drivers, and you might have lower level on the immigration case, even though somebody lost their life and resulted in death and everyone can get charged. What the government does a lot in those kind of cases is they use these conspiracies and maybe low level participants to charge them with them, even though they're not really target of the investigation because they didn't directly cause the death and weren't directly involved, and they'll flip them to work for the government and to help the government prosecute the higher level people in the conspiracy.
So when you're dealing with internet crimes, a lot of times you get things like internet child pornography, you get some trafficking situations. How does the federal government get involved in those kind of cases?
As to the child pornography cases, I've got one, in fact, pending right now, and it's typically what those are. They're internet-based, and the activity is going on these peer-to-peer sharing networks where people go on and they communicate with they find some other people that are also involved in child and sharing child porn. And so they'll request files from each other. What the government will do is they kind of patrol those sites. And when they see that, they'll put themselves out as somebody who's interested in file sharing and try to get whatever information they can get that's enough to go and get a search warrant for that person's computer. Once they identify a file that they believe that is child porn and they can identify the IP address of whoever requested it or, more importantly, downloaded it, then they'll draft a warrant to that effect. And so they can go and try to seize the computer and make a case that way.
It seems to be more of a federal court process because you're dealing with the internet.
It is. Obviously, the email transmissions, plus I think they're more sophisticated and trained to pursue those cases than maybe the state agencies. Although there's some state agencies that do have units dedicated to that. I think that's more the case on the trafficking cases, the trafficking of maybe minors for sex purposes, and that a lot of that undercover work, I think in what I've seen, is done a lot more by state agencies than the feds. I see the federal agents more on the child pornography cases that they're pursuing.
So if a case comes in, it's a state charge, right? I work in a state district court. We have in this country something called federalism. We have a dual court process. There are two separate types of court systems. One is a state court system. The other is a federal court system. So in the state court system in Texas, the prosecutor or the prosecuting agency that brings forth these types of cases is what we refer to as the chief prosecutor. County by county, that's the elected district attorney. In Bexar County, Joe Gonzalez is currently the elected DA. So the individuals that prosecute that cases work in his office. How does it work on the federal side? Who prosecutes these cases and how do they get their position?
Each state has different districts. Right now in San Antonio, we're part of the Western District of Texas, of the Federal Justice Department. In Texas, there are 4 divisions. There's the Northern District, Southern, Eastern, and Western. Each one has their own chief attorney, and he's called the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas, and those are elected by the president, I guess it is. His line prosecutors stay from one year to the next, just like the district attorney's office. Each time a new administration comes in and they change the actual U.S. attorney for that district, then he might shuffle his people, but there's usually not a house cleaning of prosecutors. They're usually the same prosecutors. The chiefs of every division might get moved around a little bit. Now, one thing it seems that has changed a little bit recently is that in the past, about 5 years ago and before that, there used to be more different units within the U.S. Attorney's Office that would prosecute like child porn cases, drug cases, white-collar cases, immigration cases, and so forth. For some reason, the last couple of years, it appears that their prosecutors are handling everything. I think there may be rotating cases that they come in regardless of what kind of case it is, but you're starting to see now, at least in the Western District here in San Antonio, that the prosecutors are handling all different types of cases. I think what I have seen, and I don't know if it's something that's policy, I think it's more just customary within their office, is that the agents that are out there working these cases, however a case is brought to an agent's attention, whether by an informant or a witness or whatever trick triggers an investigation, those agents have prosecutors that they work with more than other prosecutors. I think they establish some kind of a working relationship or a rapport. And from my observations, I think the agents will call on those prosecutors and say, hey, I have this case. Do you want to review it? What steps should we take? And I think that's kind of how the cases start with, is an agent and a prosecutor getting together and talking about what steps to take to develop a case, and then it goes from there.
So every U.S. attorney in the country gets appointed by the President of the United States?
Each U.S. attorney of each district, yes.
And currently it's Jaime Esparza in the Western District, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just heard that the other day. He used to be the elected district attorney in El Paso.
Yeah, I was thinking Laredo, but yeah, you're right, El Paso.
You're talking about how the agents work directly with the federal prosecutors. That's a little different than on the state side, right? On the state side, prosecutors don't really get involved in investigation as they're ongoing. On the federal side, I think prosecutors are a little more involved.
Yeah, because like I said, I think it's on the federal side, you have most cases, they take months and a lot of planning and strategy to develop the cases, because it's a wider net. Typically bigger organizations or multiple people involved. On the white collar case, it's a lot of technical, it's a lot of it is data driven. Their strategy on the federal side is to, because maybe they have the resources to put into it, is to really work up a case before they actually file it. And work it up by having undercover people going in, by surveillance, by recordings. They really have a long plan to really get their case together before it's filed. Versus on the state side, a lot of them, there's not a lot of investigation after the fact. Now you do, obviously, on some murders, the detectives work up a lot of those cases and go out and try to talk to witnesses and see what evidence they can dig up, but it's not as far reaching, I don't think, as the federal cases.
Right. I've seen the federal system use a lot more wiretapping, a lot more warrants related to being able to surveil people in a different way.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and do a quick Q&A break. We'll be right back.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at BeyondTheGavelPodcast.com.
Welcome to the Q&A break. We have a question. It reads as follows. For a victim to become a survivor and work the process of self-care, which involves a lifetime of healing and not always seen with resilience, how does the judge foster the support and collaboration throughout the process of the criminal trial proceeding? Wow. Okay.
I think I can, offer my feelings from a defense perspective, defense attorney with clients, obviously, who were not the victims. And so from my perspective, I would hope that my clients and people who find themselves in these situations, at least after the offense occurs, is to show respect for the victims, not only to keep themselves out of trouble and not reoffend, but just to show respect for the victims. And I guess that means just, if you have to do your time, you do your time, and not get into victim blaming or create a situation that makes things worse.
There's things that the court system does to try to ensure that those that have been victims of crime come along. Things like having the prosecutors, victims advocates come in with the complainants before the trial starts, get them comfortable with the location. Sometimes I see them sit in the courtroom. Sometimes I see them sit in the witness chair. Ultimately, one of the things that the legislature did some years back, which I think is pretty significant, is that they've allowed for a victim impact statement subsequent to the trial. So after a plea or after a jury trial, let's say somebody is sentenced, we go off the record. It's not recorded. We put the defendant up on one side of the bar or the bench. And then the complainant or the victim can come up and they can address the defendant in whatever way they want. They can get whatever they need to off their shoulders. The individual who's been convicted does not have a right to respond, but they can basically tell them, this is how my life has been affected. And I think giving those folks an opportunity to express themselves goes a long way towards healing. Obviously, I think it's important that we all recognize that victims of crime need to be respected, and we do our best to ensure that throughout the process, that there's no disrespect outside, obviously, of things like cross-examination and things of that nature. We should always respect those that basically are part of the system through means that are not necessarily something that they asked for. That was a great question. Keep asking those questions. Let's head back into the show.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at BeyondTheGavelPodcast.com.
Welcome back. I'm here talking to Scott McCrum, attorney who handles both federal and state criminal defense. So let's say somebody comes into your office and again, they're charged with a federal case. How do you counsel them? What's the first thing that you tell them when they come out?
Well, it's case specific. It's trying to find out what the details of the case, what the client's involvement is. I mean, even if they haven't hired me, it's all confidential. And so I try to get the client's confidence that they can tell me what they think their exposure is or what it might be, what they know about the case.
Yeah, 'cause once they come in your office, you're established as it relates to the attorney-client relationship, right?
That's right.
Even if they don't hire you, the fact that they're consulting with you, there's a relationship where then you owe them a duty of keeping whatever they tell you secret.
100%. Yeah, so it's just try to find out as much as I can about the case to know how to counsel them. And on the federal side, typically once they know they're being investigated, there's not a whole lot you can do because they don't usually know until the case is pretty much wrapped up for the government.
So unlike the state side, when they're informed that the case has been charged against them, then they know something's happened, and generally speaking, it just occurred. On the federal side, there's some extensive investigation that has taken place.
For the most part, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then
see what I can do with it. If I'm not hired, sometimes what I'll do is call the agent or in most cases, the prosecutor and see if they'll give me an idea of what the case is about. And I'll tell them that I've been approached by somebody and try to get a feel if it's something that they're already going to file or have filed or the extent of the person's alleged involvement in the case. 99% of the time, the prosecutor at that time will tell me, well, do you want to bring him in so we can talk to him? 99% of the time we say no, obviously, but that's part of the evaluation too. If it's something that the client knows that they're going to have exposure and they're going to have trouble with, then they might want to cut their losses. And that's part of the evaluation as well is do you play hard line from the start and saying, we're not going to cooperate, you file whatever you want and we'll talk to you later in court? Or do you say, well, what can we do to help ourselves? And that's a lot of times where the conspiracy aspect comes in, is that you might have somebody that the feds, that's not their main target. And so to help yourself early on enough, it might be a situation where the client says, yeah, go in and talk to them.
And that's case specific because they're in the federal system, there's advantages to assisting the government as early as you can, right?
100%. Yes.
Yeah. What are some of those advantages?
There's a lot more cooperation. It happens, and I don't know why, to be honest with you. It hardly happens, as you know, it hardly happens at all on the state side. And probably because they're not, when they're investigating one person, they're not investigating the whole organization in the state side. So they charge one, I mean, that's all they're going to get out of the deal. As opposed on the federal side, where the cases are larger, involves multiple individuals. If you have one defendant, know that they've got trouble, they've got exposure, and they go in and cooperate with the government, it's called 5K1 reduction, where it can end up lessening the punishment that they do. Number one. Number two, in a federal case, because the investigations are so solid in most cases, and they've got so much information by the time they file a case, that really your defense is going to be limited once you filed it. On top of that, sentencing, when it comes to what your exposure, what kind of sentence you may get, it's not like in the state system, where in state system you have your ranges of punishment: a third degree, 2 to 10 years, second 2 to 20, first degree 5 to 99. And you can work out a case and come in and try to negotiate a plea if it's something that you're not going to challenge or fight, or you don't want to go to trial on. And there's a wide range of punishment options. You might argue for probation at the low end, or a short sentence, or some kind of a treatment program. There's even pretrial diversions on the state side. So there's a lot you can do with sentencing if you can't beat a case to try to work something out. In the federal system, that's not the case. Probations exist, but they're very, very rare, number one. Pretrial divisions exist too. I don't know if I've seen one in the last 20 years. I've heard of them, but I don't think I've seen one. Sentencing also is, you can't negotiate a sentence on the federal side with a prosecutor. You can't, even though there's also ranges of punishment on the federal side, like 5 to 40, 0 to 10, and so forth. You can't go in and negotiate a sentence with a prosecutor on the federal side.
And that's because in the federal system, let's say you enter a plea or you have a jury trial, even subsequent to a jury trial, the court or the judge always determines a sentence.
That's right.
And so they do that by using a system of points. The way I've heard that described way back in the day, the federal sentencing guidelines are like a cookbook, right? Like,
yeah, I've got a copy right here.
That's right. And it's a lot thicker than it used to be. Yeah, absolutely. And so the federal sentencing guidelines, this is put together by the United States Sentencing Commission. And so what they do is they say, if an individual committed this type of a crime with this extra thing, then that's going to be some points added to the overall system. If they do things like take responsibility or do other things that would help them, then that would lower those overall points. And then at the end of the day, they add and subtract those points, and whatever the ultimate sentence is based on that category. Is that kind of how that works?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yes.
It's you start with the sentencing table. And that's on the inside the front cover there of what you're thumbing through.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that there's columns of numbers. Those numbers are ranges of months for wherever you're going to end up on that table. So what you do, and that's going back to what you asked me earlier as well, when I first talked to a client about when he comes and tells me, well, this is they're investigating me for, and well, what am I looking at? What you have to do using that table is try to figure out where they would fall in that table regarding the offense that they're charged with in their criminal history. There's two facets of those tables. Like you said, the first is calculating the offense level. Every federal crime is going to have a base offense level attributed to it. Anything, drug trafficking crimes, sex crimes, immigration crimes, firearms cases. And once you define what base offense level applies, as you mentioned, there's adjustments that are made. Adjustments can go up or down on the points, and they're according to aggravating or mitigating circumstances. For example, if you use a child in the commission of your offense, well, you might have to bump up 2 points or 4 points. If you obstructed justice, you can go up on the number of points. A lot of the adjustments that are used in conspiracy cases are regarding the leadership role. Whether if you're a leader, if you're a manager, then your points will go up. If you have a minimal role, if you're a minimal participant, for example, you did relatively little in the offense, well, then your points can go down maybe by 2 points. So there's a lot of considerations in that book. And that's where a lot of the defense work is done on federal cases, is trying to see which adjustments in there might apply that might help you, and try to get the prosecutor to agree that those apply, and also recognize which ones hurt you. Because the mistake a lot of inexperienced federal lawyers do is they don't really know the guideline, because there's a lot of adjustments. It's a lot of intricacies there, and you're not going to know where you're going to end up on the guidelines or what the range is until after you plead or after you're found guilty. And so if you don't recognize that at the start, and if your client decides they want to plead guilty, but they do it on information that's not accurate, well, then that can go very bad for them at sentencing.
By way of example, I just opened up this book that you handed me, and it's got the sentencing table on the inside, which lists the criminal history category. So obviously, the less criminal history somebody has, the lower amount of months apply to that particular category of offense. I open up the book to aggravated assault. Aggravated assault in the state system, generally speaking, is where somebody threatens somebody else's life. Maybe somebody shot at an individual or pulled out a knife and threatened somebody. That's a second-degree felony in our system, the state system, punishable by anywhere from 2 up to 20 years. According to this book, the sentencing guidelines on the federal system, an aggravated assault starts at the base offense level at 14, which means that's where you start. with no prior criminal history, it's 15 months to 21 months. That's a much smaller range, which is interesting to me as a state court judge. And then this book talks about increasing things like if the assault involved more than minimal planning, you increase by 2 levels. If a firearm is discharged, increase by 5 levels. If it's a dangerous weapon, increase by 4 levels. If there's bodily injury, increase by 3 levels. 5 levels for serious bodily injury, 7 levels for permanent or life-threatening bodily injury, 4 levels for other things, and then it goes from there. And so as a result of all this, then your job would be to look through this book and look for those particular categories that would bring those levels down. What are some examples that you would look for with a situation like that?
Well, the calculation and the deliberation is a good example. The offense itself, I don't think I've ever had an aggravated assault. Those, they leave to the state to prosecute those. The only time that I think that you would find an aggravated assault, just a pure aggravated assault, not on top of any kind of trafficking or fraud or anything, but just an aggravated assault in a federal court, is if it happened on federal property.
Right.
For example, anything that happens on a military base, even a DWI, is going to be processed in federal court.
Even a possession of marijuana.
That's right. If it happens on a base, a military base, or something on federal property. So, but as far as the calculation, you're right, and that goes back to what I was saying when you're advising your client, for example, on something where you saw the offense. It appears at first to be a range of 12 to 15 months, or 15 to 18 months. I don't remember what you said it was. You have to be careful, because if you don't see that these upward adjustments, they're called, which is a +2 for this, +4 for that, +3 for that. If you don't recognize that those can and probably will apply, then you might walk your client into a plea with them thinking it's going to be a 15-month deal. And yeah, I'll take that deal, whatever. I'm not going to help the government. I can handle 15 months, and then get to sentencing with all these adjustments and have an 80-month or 120-month sentence because of adjustments.
On the state court side, which we talked about in a prior episode with Monica Guerrero, she did an excellent job in highlighting what it's like to pick a jury. One of the things that I notice as a judge is the importance of how you use terminology, right? The phraseology. One side, either the state or the defense, can ask a question of a juror and basically have that juror say they can't be fair. And then the other side will generally ask the same question, but phrase it in a way where then the possible juror would completely change your mind and say, well, yeah, when you put it that way, I can definitely see that. So it seems like the way you word things is very significant. You don't really get that benefit on the federal court side, right?
No, you don't.
And so a lot of it is based on the particular judge and the language that they use and the perspective that they have in determining whether or not somebody could be fair.
And you don't have that latitude to keep questioning the potential juror and go back and forth between the attorney for the state and the defense attorney. The issue will come up, and you might challenge it, and the judge is going to issue a ruling, and that's it. Now, what some judges do, and I don't really know, I don't remember it being done this way too much in the past, but recently judges have been allowing the magistrate judges to conduct voir dire.
Okay.
And the magistrate judges, typically they're younger, so they weren't around on the old system where you attorneys didn't have any voir dire time. So they're more open to letting you have those conversations with the jurors. And then, as you brought up, as far as challenging a juror for cause, you can have a little bit more of that back and forth. They give you a little bit more leeway than the district judges.
That's kind of starting to happen in our system too, right? We do have an associate judge in Bexar County now that works with the criminal district courts, Judge Miguel Nájera, and he has been selecting jurors or doing the voir dire process on behalf of district court judges, which then enables us to basically pick up the case from that point.
Judge Nájera did the voir dire on one of my trials.
Yeah.
And then handed it off to the district judge.
How does that compare to what we do on the state side in the federal courts?
Well, you just got to mind your P's and Q's a lot more, because the judges are a lot more, as you said, formal. For example, on objections, as you've seen in state court, there's a lot more leeway given for attorneys when they get up. Not only do they state their legal objection, but they might comment on the evidence, or they might throw out, maybe some points they want to make in addition to the legal objection. In federal court, you don't have that much a leeway, and you do that a couple of times too many, and the judge will dress you down, and you'll look real bad. So you've got to be more careful of that. It's just a straightforward, what is your legal objection, and they'll rule on it. And so it's not as much, I hate to call it grandstanding, but it's a lot of, in state court, you're trying to get the jury's respect. You try to get them to believe in what you're trying to, your theory of the case. And a lot of that is, it might depend on your approach, your style, the way you carry yourself and conduct your examination of witnesses. And you try to build that where they have confidence that you believe in your case and you believe in your client, and that is the way that they should be viewing the case. And in federal court, you're a lot more structured, so it's a lot more difficult to do that.
Well, let's get a little personal with you, Scott. I've known you a long time, and you've tried cases in front of me.
I have.
Tell us a little bit about your personal life.
I've gotten beaten up a few times in front of you, from what I remember, but I guess we all do. I am, like we said, a lifelong San Antonio. I live here. I live on a little bit of acreage. I enjoy my time outside and just working outside with the pets, and spend a lot of time just doing that. I've got a son who's in law school, his second year of law school. So I'm very proud of him. Looking forward to him getting out, maybe working for the DA's office. That's what he wants to do. So I'm proud of him. After I get out of here, I think I'm going to head to Corpus to visit my brother down there.
For the weekend?
For the weekend. It's his birthday tomorrow.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. You have family in Corpus?
Just him.
I'm from Portland originally.
Yes. Yeah. We've talked about that. Yeah. Actually, my brother had a real cool house, that same brother in Port Aransas. But it got damaged real bad by that Hurricane Harvey. Right. And so he ended up just selling that house, and now he's in North Padre.
I went fishing down there right after that hurricane. I was shocked with the devastation that community went through. I grew up in a lot of ways around Port Aransas. I work with Child Protective Services in Aransas Pass, and we used to go to Port Aransas quite a bit and sort of enjoy the food over there. I love the food in Port A.
Just that whole coastal area is fun. I've loved it. We used to do our summer vacations as kids. Was spending a week camping on the beach every summer, and right there near Bob Hall Pier. That was our vacation. So it's always been a special place for me. I'm kind of disappointed to not have seen Corpus develop more by now.
Right.
But I think there's, that's probably there's some good things to come, but I still try to go down there as much as I can.
Interesting how it works, right? So you're telling me that you would go down to that area for vacations and to try to get out of town and enjoy something. We would come to San Antonio.
How about that?
San Antonio was our place. Yeah.
It would have been cool if we knew each other. Families could just trade homes to stay in.
It's like, hey, it's the season. You come over here, we'll go over there. Everybody's happy. Yeah. My dad would take us to the zoo, and that was a great experience. We'd always come down to the Riverwalk, and we just spent
I bet you had cool times. Your dad was a good man.
Thank you. I agree. We miss him. We miss him very, very much. Yeah. Any last words that you would have for anybody who's listening related to the federal court system, the work that you do, that kind of stuff?
Well, obviously, don't pick up any federal offenses. Don't commit federal offenses. Don't commit state offenses either. But if you do, or know someone that you do, you've got to get someone who's experienced, because there's a lot of intricacies to these federal guidelines and the sentencing guidelines, and things can go sideways real easy.
It's definitely different.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to get a hold of you, they have any questions related to any of the topics that we've talked about, what's the best way for them to contact?
Sure, just call Scott McCrum, MCCRUM, 210-225-4851.
Scott, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome, Judge. I enjoyed it. Especially, I like being the 1 year guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Congratulations to you. 1 year of your program. That's wonderful.
The time has really flown, wouldn't you say?
Too many more.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's just like life. Sometimes you look back and you go, what happened to the last year? Kind of looking forward towards the holidays. That's coming up. And again, it's like it just seemed like it was just a month ago that we were celebrating the Christmas break. And so I guess the lesson with that is always appreciate what you got.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know you're a good family person. Every time I see you in the court, you talk about your son. You're very proud of your son. He's very blessed to have you. Just like you said, you're blessed to have him.
Absolutely.
It's important. Yeah, it's important as we go through these processes to remember those around us that love us and support us. I think that's a big part of the process. And obviously, for those that are involved in the court system, it's a big difference if you're a defendant or if you're a victim of crime to have that kind of support at the home. That means everything.
It is.
Well, thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thank you, Judge, very much.
You've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we are educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.